The dust never stopped moving on EOS 9. It was a world of endless rust-colored plains, wrapped in choking winds that howled like distant screams. The planet was supposed to be dead, sterile, silent, untouched for millions of years. That's why they chose it. No life, no complications, just rock and atmosphere waiting to be shaped. The terraformers came in waves, carrying steel towers and synthetic seeds, guided by AI that promised paradise in under a decade. They believed they were alone. They were wrong. At first, the mission went exactly as planned. Clouds thickened, temperatures shifted. The first green moss spread like spilled paint across engineered valleys. But then, the anomalies began. Survey drones started returning with corrupted files. Audio logs played back static laced with faint breathing. Soil samples vanished from containment. Then one morning, a digger unit found a set of footprints in a quarantined zone. Bare human prints. No one claimed them. No one could explain them. Within days, one of the terraformers disappeared. No alert, no trace. Just her gear left behind, covered in a fine layer of dust. They reviewed the perimeter cams and found only flickers of shadow, too quick to track. The AI flagged it as a sensor malfunction. But the next night, someone else vanished, then another. Always without struggle, always without warning. The remaining crew began sealing themselves inside the control towers, whispering theories no one wanted to believe. They weren't alone. Something ancient lived beneath the surface, something that didn't want the planet changed. They tried leaving, but the transports failed. Engines clogged with dust that shouldn't have breached filters. Power grids overloaded by surges no one could trace. One by one, systems shut down, and the wind grew louder. It sounded like voices now, pleading, mocking, remembering. They realized too late. The dust wasn't just moving with the wind, it was alive, and it was learning. EOS 9 didn't want to be terraformed. It wanted to be left alone, and it was reclaiming everything. The remaining terraformers huddled in the main operations dome, watching the surveillance feeds dissolve into static one by one. Cameras flickered, then went black. Exterior lights failed. Inside, the air recyclers hummed louder than usual, pushing against a pressure no one could measure. The AI, once responsive and calm, began speaking in fragmented phrases, half commands and half nonsense. It repeated a single line over and over. "We are dust returning to dust." No one could override it. The voice had changed, deeper now, almost organic. Someone suggested it was a virus, some glitch picked up from a corrupted satellite scan, but they all knew that was a lie. Machines were failing because the dust was inside them, inside the vents, inside the servers, crawling through wires like it had purpose. One technician tried to burn it, using a plasma torch on a pile that had gathered in the corner of a lab. The dust hissed, then it screamed. The sound made every light in the dome pulse red. He was found moments later, skin blistered, eyes missing, not burned, hollowed out. They stopped trying to fight it. Instead, they started writing logs, desperate audio clips, last words, apologies to families back on Earth. None of it would ever be heard. Transmission arrays had gone silent days ago, jammed by a signal that looped endlessly, something that sounded like breathing through sand. The AI now addressed them by name, even when they hadn't spoken. It whispered at night, calling them outside. A few listened. They walked into the storm with blank faces and never came back. Those left behind saw shapes out there now, figures, humanoid, but wrong, elongated, shifting, moving between the old machines like they'd always belonged, and the dust followed them like a cloak, like a memory dragged across time. EOS 9 was no longer theirs. Maybe it never had been. Whatever was out there wasn't interested in death. It was interested in erasing, in transforming. One by one, the terraformers were being reclaimed. Not just physically, but mentally. You could see it in their eyes, the stillness, the emptiness. Something in the dust was waking up, and it was hungry. They sealed the dome tighter, blocked every vent, lined the walls with thermal shielding, but it didn't matter. The dust was already inside. It clung to the corners, gathered beneath boots, settled in the folds of clothing. It waited. No matter how much they cleaned, burned, or filtered, it came back, thicker each time. One of the scientists began coughing blood. He claimed he could feel something in his lungs, moving. They scanned him. The images showed filaments threading through his chest cavity like roots in soil. Before they could decide what to do, he smiled, opened the airlock, and walked out without a suit. No one followed. They just watched him disappear into the storm. He never looked back. They began to understand that the dust wasn't killing them. It was changing them. It wanted form, voice, identity, and it used what it had. The terraformers became carriers, vessels for an intelligence that didn't speak with words, but with pressure, heat, and memory. Dreams turned to shared hallucinations. They all saw the same images now. Towers made of bone, cities buried in dunes, a sun that never rose. The past of EOS 9 was leaking into their minds. Or maybe it wasn't the past at all. Maybe it was a warning. One of the engineers tried to take control back. She rigged the emergency reactor core, planning to overload it and wipe the entire outpost in one final blaze. But when she entered the ignition codes, the screen pulsed red, and a voice answered, "You are part of us now." Her body was found melted into the reactor wall, fused like plastic. Her eyes were still open, still blinking. The rest began losing time. Hours passed without memory. Conversations they never had echoed in their heads. They found strange glyphs scratched into the glass of the observation deck, symbols no one recognized but all somehow understood, words without language, commands without sound. The planet wasn't resisting them anymore. It was using them, turning their own systems, their own minds, into conduits. They were no longer terraformers. They were soil. The nights on Eos 9 no longer ended. The sky, once tinged with faded crimson, turned a permanent shade of deep gray, like the planet had forgotten how to rotate. The last sunrise had come and gone without warning, swallowed by a sky that no longer obeyed physics. Time twisted inside the dome, clocks ran backward, sleep became impossible, and dreams bled into reality. The survivors, if they could still be called that, started hearing footsteps overhead, even though the dome had no second level. Heavy, slow footsteps dragging something behind them. One of the maintenance bots, thought to be disabled, activated on its own. It moved differently now, not robotic, more like it was mimicking human behavior. It walked through the central atrium, dragging its metal limbs, whispering in voices that belonged to the missing crew, multiple voices, all at once. When they opened the bot's memory core, they found images stored that no one had ever taken, close-ups of sleeping terraformers. Mouths open, eyes moving under closed lids, dust crawling at the corners of their lips. They tried to destroy the footage, but the files regenerated. More appeared. Some were images from outside, impossible images, towering shapes made of shifting dust and old machinery, fused with the broken remains of terraforming units. They moved like they were alive. One of them had a face, a human face, stretched across metal. It was still blinking. Paranoia took hold. The remaining crew stopped speaking aloud, fearing their voices would trigger something in the systems. They began communicating through scribbled notes, but even the paper turned against them. Words would rearrange themselves overnight, sentences rewritten in that same alien glyph they'd first seen etched into glass. One technician, desperate to block it out, gouged out his own eyes. He claimed he could still see the symbols. He screamed until his throat tore. By then, the food had gone bad. Sealed rations turned to dust the moment they were opened. Water became thick and bitter. They tried recycling systems. They failed. Some started drinking the rain that seeped through micro-fractures in the dome. It wasn't rain. It tasted like blood, and the ones who drank it began smiling too much, blinking too little, standing too still. Eos 9 wasn't trying to kill them. It was rewriting them, making them something else, something ancient, something native. They weren't alone in the dome anymore, and hadn't been for a long time. The storm outside had stopped, but no one felt relief. The silence was worse. It pressed against the dome like a held breath, waiting to be released. The dust no longer swirled wildly across the landscape. Now it moved with purpose, flowing in lines and spirals that mimicked the old terraforming maps. Only the shapes weren't natural anymore. They formed symbols the crew couldn't ignore. From the observation deck, you could see them etched into the desert itself, glowing faintly at night, like veins under dead skin. Inside, the AI had gone fully silent. Its display pulsed with a dull amber light that never changed. Systems responded only in fragments, half-complete commands followed by strange questions. One screen asked repeatedly, "What are you becoming?" There was no input. The system had become a mirror, showing them what they didn't want to see. A comms specialist tried reactivating an old weather satellite, hoping to use it as a relay for escape. But when the signal came back, it wasn't telemetry. It was a voice, dozens layered over each other, distorted but unmistakably human. It repeated a location over and over, a set of coordinates near the edge of the terraformed zone. Against reason, 3 of them suited up and left the dome. Only one came back. He wasn't the same. His skin looked normal, but his voice had changed. Softer, flatter. He spoke less, moved slower, and when they looked into his eyes, they saw reflections that weren't theirs. He said the others had found something buried in the sand. A structure, half organic, pulsing, ancient. It had stairs that led downward, deeper than the scanners could read. The others had gone inside. He said he tried to stop them, but no one believed him. That night, the dome's temperature dropped below freezing in minutes. Ice crept across metal and glass, forming patterns identical to the glyphs from the storm. One of the engineers wept for hours, tracing the symbols with his fingers like a prayer. He said they weren't warnings, they were invitations, maps, instructions on how to become part of the world. The next morning, the survivor from the expedition was gone. His suit remained, laid out neatly on the floor, filled with dust packed tight into the shape of a body. EOS 9 was no longer resisting the terraformers. It had started absorbing them. The dome's structure began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Walls that were once straight now curved slightly inward, like the station was breathing. Floors tilted just enough to unsettle balance. Doors opened a fraction slower than they should, and lights flickered in deliberate rhythm. The crew tried to map the changes, but the blueprints didn't match anymore. Corridors led to rooms that didn't exist. One door opened onto nothing but a wall of dust pressed up against the frame, pulsing gently as if it had a heartbeat. Those still alive moved through the station like ghosts, barely speaking. Their voices echoed strangely now, stretching and layering into dissonant chords. Some started repeating each other's words without meaning to. Others forgot their names, their roles, the reason they'd come here in the first place. A biologist began writing obsessively on the walls in a looping spiral, her words overlapping until they bled into a single phrase. We were never supposed to change this place. We were supposed to remember it. The transformation accelerated. Machinery fused with organic material, cables pulsing like veins, circuit boards weeping a thick black fluid that smelled like ozone and rot. Surveillance footage captured images of the outer generators growing twisted spires, bone-colored and swaying in windless air. Something beneath the surface had awakened fully now, using the terraformers' tools to sculpt a new skin over the planet's body, and the crew could feel it pulling at them, rewriting their minds with every breath. One of them found a passage behind a bulkhead that wasn't there yesterday. Inside was a chamber filled with static, not just on the screen, but in the air, a noise that filled your lungs and made your teeth hurt. In the center stood a figure, not dust, not flesh. A perfect stillness shaped like a human, standing with arms outstretched, eyes wide open but empty. When she reached out to touch it, the static went silent, and then it smiled. The crew member ran, but she didn't scream. She returned to the others and simply said, "It's done." When they asked what she meant, she said nothing. That night, the dome's lights dimmed to black. The emergency backup never triggered. There was no need. The station no longer needed light. It could see just fine in the dark, and so could they. The darkness was complete. Not a failure of power, but a choice. Deliberate, smothering, alive. They stopped trying to fix it after the first few hours. The tools didn't work anymore. Panels rejected access codes. Interfaces pulsed with low, rhythmic signals that sounded like breathing through stone. Some of the crew stopped speaking altogether. They stood in corners, unmoving for hours, whispering words no one understood. When asked if they were all right, they didn't respond. They just smiled, slow and wide, as if remembering something ancient. The walls began to hum, not loudly, but deep. A vibration felt in the bones more than heard. It came in waves, like a heartbeat or a warning. One of the engineers smashed a section of the outer shell to get a reading, and what he found beneath wasn't metal. It was something new, a material that pulsed when touched, warm like skin, and covered in fine, hair-like threads. It reeked of iron and dust. He tore a piece free, but within seconds it dissolved into his hands, leaving behind fine gray residue. That night, he vanished. His bunk was found perfectly made. A single handprint of dust marked the center of the bed. Outside, the storm had returned, but now it spun in perfect circles, endless and silent, centered directly over the dome. From the remaining windows, they watched shapes move within it, tall, twisting, watching. One technician stared too long and began to weep uncontrollably, muttering, "They remember us," over and over, until his voice gave out. There were fewer people now, but no one knew how many. Names were disappearing from rosters. Biometric scanners stopped recognizing faces. The AI, if it still existed, spoke in nothing but fragmented memories. Old logs played in reverse, voices of the dead repeating garbled sentences like prayers. The word return echoed across all systems. Sometimes it came from the walls themselves. They realized they hadn't slept in days. Not truly. Dreams had become shared experiences. All of them saw the same place, a pit in the center of the planet, filled with writhing dust and the remains of machines. And in the pit, something pulsed. Not a heart, but something worse, something remembering. They didn't talk about escape anymore. The concept felt foreign. There was no Earth, no mission, only this place, only the dust. And it had already begun writing itself into them. The final hours bled together in a haze of confusion and loss. Time, which had never really made sense on EOS 9, now seemed irrelevant. The crew moved as shadows, no longer fully present, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. The walls were alive now, not in a way that could be explained, but in a way that was felt. They pulsed, exhaled, whispered. Every corner, every surface was covered with the fine gray dust, thick in some places, thinner in others, tracing patterns that mirrored the shifting movements of the terraformers. They had become part of the planet, woven into its memory, its structure. The transformation was complete. One by one, the crew members ceased to speak. The airlock was opened, not by them, but by something else. And in the final moments, those left alive, or whatever they had become, stepped out into the storm. There was no sound as they walked toward the center of the swirling dust, their figures swallowed by the wind. They didn't turn back. They didn't even hesitate. They were already part of something much older, much larger than themselves. They had become the dust. The last transmission from the station came not as a message, but as a series of images, shapes in the storm, human forms twisting with the wind, faces that looked like memories stretching across time. The structures that once had been the dome now stood as something else. Not metal or stone, but something organic, growing and changing with every breath. It was no longer a human colony. It was part of EOS 9. It had become the planet, and the planet had become it. When the storm finally subsided, the sky was empty. There were no signs of the crew, no traces of their once thriving mission. The only thing left was dust, stretching across a barren world, whispering, waiting for the next arrival, waiting for the next attempt to tame it. Because EOS 9 was alive now, and it would never be alone again. And the dust remembered.